Thank you very much. My work in Iraq was very interesting. I went over as in charge of counterintelligence. I'm a counterintelligence agent besides being a pilot. Unfortunately, in the 90s, the flying slots were low, and they said, would you like to be a counterintelligence air specialist? Okay. Bad move. No, actually, it was a good one. I enjoyed it. I worked with all the agencies, and they sent me a nice letter in '99 when I was president of GMAP and said, welcome back. And as an officer, they can call you to age 62 and you can't say it. My wife was not happy. My salary went to about 10% of what I was getting, and she was really not happy at that point. But I did have the opportunity to go to Iraq, and as a geologist, that was great, but I didn't go over as a geologist. Like I said, in charge of counterintelligence. I was sent out to Abu Ghraib prison. I lived in a cell there with another old officer. We were sent over there to clean that mess up. That was interesting. Then it became known publicly, and there was 1 million reporters there, and that was even more interesting. Then, when they captured Saddam, they needed an old man. The Iraqis, I like the people in the Middle East because they appreciate old people. I have 2 daughters. They appreciate age. And honestly, that is one of the main reasons they sent me over there. I sat in the back of all interrogations with nothing to do with it, but I was an older person. That was my qualifications. And with Saddam, when he goes to trial, I was in the next room. I had to write the arrest warrant for him. It was very interesting life. But then I met a general. And he was talking, we were talking about how to get electricity to the Iraqis because they were getting 3 hours a day and it's 130 degrees. Just think of that. So he found out I was a geologist. The next day, my title changed. They had no geologists in all of Iraq to analyze what they had. Here we are, it's 2004, and that's an oil country. So I started out my business basically working with the engineers trying to get the gas captured in southern Iraq, all that flared natural gas. And how many of you have ever, you guys are young, well some of you are, been out to West Texas in the 50s and seen it looked like daylight. I remember going in the early 50s, I'm an old guy, seeing that. Well, if you go down to southern Iraq or up towards Kirkuk, it was the same way. So I went down to try to figure out a way to capture all the natural gas, get it to gas turbines that we're putting in, so they could have electricity. Because I wrote a paper and said, you get them 24-hour electricity, the war is over. And they agreed with me. The United States government agreed with me. How can you fight a war, go home and blow up things, if you tell your wife you blew up the power generator and it's 130 degrees and you don't have air conditioning? Think of that. I'm serious. I'm actually serious. So we went to capture that. Shell took it over, and we're going to go from here. What I'm going to talk about is this right up here, future Saudi Arabia. When I first started giving this talk, when the Army allowed me to release some figures, there was a question mark there. Not anymore. And I'll tell you why, because a lot of things happen in Kurdistan and other areas. But again, if you have any questions when we go, here's a map that we actually constructed in 2004. We put it on our ArcGIS platform. We had every single pipeline, every pumping station, every gas oil separation plant. We had them, everything mapped out in Iraq. We also had the electrical grids. That's not on this. All the 400 kV lines. We were able to rebuild the entire infrastructure. But that cost money and other things, and we'd like to get these oil fields going. And it's a great map. You guys can have copies if you want. I'm leaving this all with you, but it has all the major pipelines. We even found the pumping stations that went into Jordan. We found out there was a pipeline in 1948 that was turned off when Israel became a country. It was a very, very good map. We mapped out all the gas oil separation, the generators, the refineries, everything is on this map. So, if any of you are interested in having it. Some of the newer fields aren't on here. These are the only fields as of 2004. Okay, I'm going to talk about the history, countrywide opportunities, the Kurdish region, Central, Northwest, Western, Southern, and summary conclusions. And it country can be broken up very easily. And I'll show you why. The geology is tremendous. Being a geologist, I got to work with, the plate tectonics in the north, glacial out in the western deserts in the Ordovician and Silurian, glacial deposits, all the way down to your Zubar, your main delta systems, and salt in the south, just like we do here in Texas. And it was very, very exciting. Okay, the Geosur, that's up in the Kurdish region. I'll talk about that later, and I'll show you a map, which is interesting. A farmer was trying to get a water well. This is 1901. They finally dug a little well 400 feet deep. I think hit Ordovician, and oil came out. They just had local use of it. The first real field was Nafkan. That's right on the Iranian border. They built a pipeline from there down into Baghdad. And then the big Kirkuk. You heard Kirkuk. That is the problem right now we're having in Iraq between the Kurds and the Iraqis. BP just took over 2/3 of it, and the Kurds don't like it. I'll talk about that in a second. World War II, it says after the Basra, the southern region. Why was it after World War II? Well, they could start shipping out by ships and the subs wouldn't sink them, basically. Again, up towards Kirkuk, and then this is the thing you need to think about. How many wells have been drilled in Texas? This country is about the same square miles as Texas. Okay, same square miles. The success rate is near 70% of all wells. That doesn't mean there's 30% dry holes. I was with wells that had 8 and 9 million cubic feet, which are DNA'd, because it's gas. The real success rate is probably 85 to 90%. What is it here? Think about that. And we found that I had a lot of captured data. I had all the North Oil Company, Southern Oil Company, and major oil data that was captured. I had people translate it for me. And we found there that the seismic that was done in the late 50s, 60s, and 70s, there was over 400 major structures left to be drilled as of 2004. This is not a 10-foot sand on a little fault. Let me rest assured, I guarantee you it's not. This was the first, I was told that this is that well at Baba in Kirkuk that blew out. It blew out 100,000 barrels a day for 9 days. I'm not certain if this is the picture, but they told me it was. It looks like old East Texas and stuff. We're going to talk about Kurdish region. You have to understand the culture of these areas before you go working. We made the mistake in the military and other government officials that they tried bringing our thoughts and ways of doing things in there. They shouldn't have. We have to do it the way they do it. You have to learn the culture. We made a lot of mistakes to begin with in these wars over there. You have to understand the people. And once you do that, then you'll get along. And the Kurds actually go into Iran, the actual Kurdish tribes. There's two major ones, the Barzanis, the Talibanis, but there's some minor ones also. And in Turkey, that's the problem right up in here, because a lot of Kurds want to be a big Kurdish country. But that's going to be solved, I think, shortly. And I'll tell you why. Okay, how many of you have been in an oil seep before? Okay. There were so many oil seeps in Kurdistan that in fact, one of the mountains, Quagga, which Chevron has now, if you translate it from their language, means Black Mountain. It was 120 kilometers long, Black Mountain. That wasn't even Kirkuk. Remember Kirkuk in the historical sense, the eternal fires? Those were these asphalt. He's sitting on it. Those are asphalt flows. Those are oil seeps. This whole mountain here. This is a Gulf Keystone slide. I'm using some oil company slides, by the way. There's a man down here. This is all oil coming out of this rock. And this isn't just a little example. It's all over the northern area. Okay, this is an Upper Cretaceous rock. I want you to look at the main thing. It's not just the oil that's coming out, because it was everywhere. They had one of the seals in the Upper Cretaceous broke on this one. problem we were having in drilling wells in Kurdistan wasn't finding oil. Oil was coming up everywhere. He was drilling the hole because there's so many fractures and permeability and porosity, they weren't getting any drilling fluids returning, zeros. That's the main problem first, was the drilling of the wells. And so there were some wells that were lost early on because, can you imagine the drilling fluid going in here under pressure? It was very difficult. This is a Gulf Keystone blocks. These are anticlines. My suggestion, because there was no seismic in all of Kurdistan, Hussein did not like them. I did have gravity. But our suggestion was, if they couldn't get a real fast 2D, go out to the middle of the nearest anticline and drill. And that's what I think these people did, the Shaikan Gulf Keystone. There's about 14 billion barrels in this anticline, this field. That's billion recoverable. They actually have 3 blocks. It's 14 billion in 3 blocks. It's out of primarily Cretaceous, fractured, and Jurassic, and Triassic rock. The Permian has not been drilled here yet. What produces in the south part, down towards Saudi and Kuwait and those places? What is one of the major rocks producing? It's Permian. Okay, the Permian Shelf up here, when the Tethys Sea was opening up then, was many, many kilometers wide and probably a couple thousand kilometers long, bordering the northeast side of the Arabian Plate. And that's what the Triassic, you know, you go to other places in the world, Triassic sometimes is not very good. Here was carbonate shelves, Triassic. So the Triassic produces. The Jurassic had beautiful carbonates, but it also had huge intercratonic basins when it was the GOTNIA, with the Sargaloo Jurassic source rock, with a TOC of anywhere from 16 to 17, covered hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of square miles. Can you imagine a 400-foot shale in this country, today's technology, with a TOC of 17, sitting there? I mean, it's just amazing, just amazing. But this Gulf Keystone was a very gutsy group, small company, and they had the courage to go in early. The majors are going in now. They're following. All these guys are going to be bought out. Gulf Keystone is going to be bought out. Everybody has a price. Remember that. This down here was a Permian. This is probably the Triassic right in here. This is the thrust coming from the south. These thrusts were huge. But you know what those were? I finally figured it out. Those are remnant extensional faults as the Tethys Sea was opening in the Permian all the way to the late Cretaceous, because I think late Cretaceous I saw some different movement here. That extensional faults were pushed back, and they created a huge movement along those thrust zones. And that's what I believe happened. I mean, I may be wrong, but I saw too much of this rock, and I think that's what happened. Here's a diagram of that. Right here, I believe that several of these oil companies are drilling Permian tests now. I have not seen a result yet. Some of you may have. But when they hit the Permian, that's going to be a carbonate fracture, because the Tethys Sea was opening and there was a carbonate shelf there that ran probably a couple thousand kilometers along the northeast. And remember, that plate was moving north. It was getting in warmer climates, the carbonate shells were building up, and it was rotating, I believe, counterclockwise, going into the Eurasian. That occurred in late Cretaceous. These are all productive zones. 7,400 in this one, that was a cut, 128 barrels. You know, they plugged that off real quick. 10,000, 17. The wells here are just fantastic. This I show you because it's 3 years old. I threw this in here for a reason. These companies are all, a good third of them, aren't here anymore. They were bought out, taken over. Nico, Vast, that's Chevron now. That's Black Mountain. They drilled one hole in the middle, there was so much gas and stuff problems, they just walked away. They couldn't go with it anymore. Sterling's not there. A lot of these companies are not here anymore. Exxon, Shell, Chevron, the Russians have big things, and one other little company, not It's called Janelle. You probably know the former Tony the Haywood. He came in to this company, the former BP head. He got 6 blocks here, and they are absolutely gorgeous. Several billions of barrels the last 2 years found on these blocks, and I'll show you those blocks in a second. But this is the old pipeline, and this pipeline is controlled by Baghdad, not the Kurds. But I'll show you the new pipeline. The Kurds just finished building, which is going to have a final 1.4 million barrels a day. That was just finished, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, let's go up here. This little field right here, DNO, little bitty company, they were there when I was there in '04. Gutsy people. They stayed with it. The first horizontal well was drilled up here last year. 32,000 barrels a day from 2,700 foot of horizontal section. It's a Cretaceous, upper Cretaceous. Their second well, there's 4 horizontals going here, by the way, in the Cretaceous. Their fourth well, number 23, I think, just now announced 32,000 or 34,000 barrels a day out of a 3,100 foot section. No stimulation required. They just drill it and it flows back. No fracking, things like that. Here's that Shaikan. Okay, you're going here. There's that field that I showed you, that aerial coverage. 14 to 16 billion barrels are sitting there easily, and they haven't even gone to the Permian yet. This is going to be a total. The oil business is going to be changed forever because of this. Because Saudi, Kuwait, all the other countries for years has had advanced technology. Sorry about this. Advanced technology, and they've been doing lots of work over the last 20, 30 years. Iraq had 0 because of all the wars. Just think what's going to happen when this finally gets moving. The Baghdad government and the Kurds come to an agreement, which they will, because money does talk over here. The area, these are blocks, current blocks. This is Bajil. This is that edge of that field right here. This is a field that Taka company has. These are all billion-barrel fields, not million. They just walk away from anything. It's just a million. Here, I would be rolling in the aisles, and my children would go out and buy more horses. But these blocks up here, these are open. But that's very thrusted. If you've ever walked that area, that's extremely thrusted. That'd be very dangerous, not physically, but geologically, because at the surface, even over here, there's some Paleozoics at the surface. So obviously, they're going to have to go down the Silurian and look, in Ordovician, and look for targets in this area. As you go down further, these fields, you see that line right there? That's what we call the green line. These are the 3 provinces that Kurdistan controls. They have production sharing agreements much better than these fields. That's Masal. That's a very dangerous place. Well, I mean dangerous. A lot of bad guys here. But these fields are all central government controlled. And they do not want us to have production sharing agreements yet. They have service agreements. $2 a barrel, $1.50 a barrel type. Very, very bad. One day, they will. But this is what I wanted to show you in the next picture, Kermalia. Okay, here's Kirkuk Field. You see right here was the well that blew out right there. 100,000 barrels a day. Just tremendous. It's basically an Oligocene reservoir, but it does have deeper and shallower pays in it. But look at this green line. These are blocks that are leased out. You see this line that comes down here and comes around? The Kurds own 1/3 of Kirkuk, and they run it. However, just recently, the Baghdad government gave British Petroleum rights to all of Kirkuk. There's going to be a little bit of a problem here. For one thing, the Kirkuk governor, even though he's in Baghdad territory, has not been produced much. The other two have. As we go further southeast, Binabawa. I was with a company for 2 years working in Kurdistan. I wanted them to buy this block right there, a little bitty block right there. For reasons, there was one well in the middle, had a lot of gas, H2S, I believe it was a Jurassic test. It was walked away from, and the company that had it walked away from it. I wanted our company to get it, but they, for various reasons, political or whatever, decided against it. It would be a big investment. Janelle came in with this Austrian company. They just found about 1 billion barrels equivalent on their first well. They went down a little bit deeper, got out of that gas cap, and found oil condensate. A lot of it is Jurassic Cretaceous. And here is Tok Tok. 8-Ax, which I believe was taken over by the Chinese, if I'm not mistaken, along with Janelle. These wells, I was on a couple of those wells, they tested 40 and 50,000 barrels a day on test out of these zones. And you don't have to do anything to the reservoir. It's all natural fractures. Of course, they're tough to drill. I mean, it's not easy. There's that Tok Tok right here. But there's a lot of, here's some other American West, some other companies in here. Janelle took that over also. I keep mentioning that. I hope you guys have stock in that company. Or some other companies, because they're all going to be bought out. Every single one of these. I'll go ahead and move those back. Here's a simple, right there to that American West. Here's that major fault, the thrust that came. I believe, again, that was an extensional fault one time going in this direction. But these are all plays down in the Triassic. They're more in the low folded area, not the heavy folded area. So consequently, to get to the Permian, you'd be about 6,000 to 7,000 meters, which is pretty deep. But why go down there? I talked to rack engineers in the south. Why don't you have Permian holes down here in the southern part? Or Jurassic holes? It was all Cretaceous and Miocene production. And they said, why? It'll be there in the future. I'm absolutely serious. That was their answer to us. They get so much oil out of the shallow, why drill deeper? And they're exactly right. Remember when I said go to the nearest anticline and just drill a hole? Well, in the thrusted areas, it is more complex. I mean, it is very faulted, complex. You have to know what you're doing. This I believe, was in one of the Cretaceous sands in that Barren West. So you have to watch what you're doing now. But the 3D is being completed over most of these right now. So there's a lot of good deals. Here's another one. Again, you have to watch out each zone because your drill bit will go right along these thrust belts. It's so fractured that if you don't have a good driller, which early wells did not have, now with Chevron, Exxon there, Weatherford and others are bringing all the rigs in. They have some good rigs, good people. But they've had a lot of times in which the drill bit went right along the fracture zone to the fault zone. Okay, here's that little geological field. And here's Western Zagros, another great company that's going to be bought out. There's 6 structures here. This right here was the other block I wanted to buy. But you know what's sitting right here? Iran. Iran was having problems with us at that time, political. So they didn't get it. This is 1901, or 1903 when the first well, there was 12 wells there. Well, Janelle came in again and took it behind us. They just drilled their first well and came in about 15,000 barrels a day. And this is in a low-folded, on-strike, it's Ordovician, primarily Miocene production. It's just beyond. Here's an aerial photo of that same block. Geocirc is right here. There are 5 anticlines on that block that haven't been drilled, or 4 that have not been drilled yet. They've only drilled 1. And I don't think there's a dry hole on it. Just think, if your first well comes in at 15,000 barrels, and this field was discovered in 19 1903. Just think of what happens when they do the 3D on it and find all these reservoirs. It's mind-boggling. Now these reservoirs they do have H2S. The oil quality is different because some of it was sourced from Cretaceous sources, some was from Jurassic sources. So there is a little difference. And that Western Zagros, they're going to be big one day because there's going to be 5 fields in that block. 5 fields, there's no doubt about it. Again, here's that club. There's so many blocks up here that are going to be drilled that I'll show you a map in a second. This is the map we made in 2004. Okay, right now there's that Gulf Keystone. These were just structures to be drilled. You see there's been a lot of wells. Peanut Ball was 1 billion barrels. This was 1 billion, but here's 14 billion. There's all these wells. Hunt just had that big discovery of about 15,000, 20,000 barrels a day down in theirs. Ray Hunt was very gutsy though. Hunt is right here, and it is right bordering the Baghdad line. It took a lot of guts to do this because you never know if Baghdad would come in and try to take it. But they haven't yet, so it's one of these days. Look at all of these structures that are still left to be drilled. Here is that great Western Zagros. They haven't even drilled this big structure in the center. There's billions of barrels here. Here is what it is. The reservoirs in Iraq were in such bad shape when we were there. They were pumping residual oil back into the reservoirs because they had no place to put it. The refineries couldn't crack it, and there were millions of barrels put back in the reservoirs. They really had a hard time. Shaikan, Jamlord, Beta Bawa, smaller fields by Iraq standards is anything under 750 million barrels. What would you all do here with a 750 million barrel field? Well, here's the problems. Complex geology, a lot of H2S. You have to be careful about that. There is a heavy residual oil problem. The Iraq-Turkey export pipeline has been bypassed by the new pipeline that goes in Kurdistan. Source, this is a key. And number 2, as a geologist, I kept wondering why the gravity northwest of the Greater Zab River showed at least 2,000 to 3,000 meters less sediment than to the southeast. And then I said, my God, I'm a geologist. Look at these fields. You saw those fields, how they trended east-west and northwest-southeast? 4 rivers cross at 90-degree angles. What does that mean geologic-wise? Think about it. How, on that major thrusting, you all of a sudden have 4 major rivers running perpendicular. Well, I finally figured out that the blocks, as they were moving to the north and being crushed underneath the Eurasian plate, the Iranian Eurasian plate, that they must have been, at one time, probably back in the Paleozoic, uplifted, and you had fractures going northeast, southwest, and as the plate moved up underneath, those fractures behaved differently along the plates, and you had lines of weakness where those fractures were northeast, southwest. Consequently, the river goes where the fracture was, and it kept digging in as the land keeps being put up. You know what water does. It keeps cutting and cutting, and it stayed northeast, southwest of the rivers. It was very interesting, very interesting. I actually used geology for a change. Here's some of the fields. Taki, billion barrels. A lot of natural gas in Kurdistan. I mean, there is a lot. I don't know, there are probably 60, 100 trillion cubic feet up there in gas. Good gas, too. I mean, well, it has H2S, you have to separate it. Pipeline development. Okay, let's go to the central part of Iraq. We were just up in this area. Kirkuk, Kermania, Mosul, dangerous as can be. See the rivers coming in? 90 degrees. There was 4 major ones. So I think as the block rotated up, was subducted underneath the Eurasian block that you had weaknesses and movement. Consequently, I didn't think there'd be as good production here, but I really was wrong on that. Gulf Keystone proved me wrong. The production up there was wonderful. All I can judge is that at one time it was deep enough to generate the temperature required in the source rock, and then eroded off. Smaller fields. This was the exciting one. That's my first field I worked on because I was living just west of East Baghdad Field. I was living just west of there. I went out there, and there was 1,100 barrels coming out of the field. 1,100 barrels. And they were going to be piped down to. We had a major refinery, Aldura, and the Basal generating systems in Taji also. But all of a sudden, I started looking at the geology. I had 10, 15, 20 wells, logs, and the results of all the testing that was done in 76, 77 in East Baghdad, there was 16, 20 billion barrels sitting under there, and there was 1,100 barrels coming out. The pipes were all leaking. It was terrible. They had inferior pipes because of the embargoes. Their gas oil separation, stabilization plants were terrible. They were having a hard time. But East Baghdad is the one I wanted to use to generate all the power. They had a lot of natural gas down into the main power plant so that people could get electricity. Hopefully they'll do that one day. These are fields up along, it's in the Baghdad controlled area. I just want to show you a satellite image of these fields. These are in the low folded areas, just like to the southeast of Kirkuk. Does it take a genius to drill? These are the fields. What do you think about all these other areas in between all these fields? They're all structurally there. They're going to be productive. They just didn't spend any money up in this part of the world. They spent it all in the south and in the central. Here's the fields have considerably less sediment. That's because of the differential movement of the blocks. But I was wrong about production. I really was. I didn't estimate. I didn't think they'd have that great production northwest of the Great Azov River. So that was a mistake on my part. Okay, security. Why wasn't that huge East Baghdad field that was put up for bid? Why wasn't there any bids on it? In the big bidding round, which everybody took the fields, 2 American companies out of 15 won bids. Let me tell you, I can tell you right now, because I've been authorized to release this, that I was told when I was writing, helping them with the Constitution, and also in the reports on how to rebuild their oil business, I was not, by the highest authority in this land, I was ordered not to recommend any U.S. companies because of conflict of interest. I told them I wouldn't anyway. I'm an ethical person. I did not mention anybody by name. And this was published 2 years ago by the media, finally. They keep saying we went in for oil. I was told, direct order, just the opposite. It was interesting. But security, why wasn't East Baghdad taken? You have 16 billion barrels, Cretaceous through Miocene, 10 pays, easy to produce, sitting right next to the refineries and power plants. It sits right along a big chunk of it's called Solder City. I don't know if you heard the big revolution in 2004. I was down in Nasiriyah and Najaf and those places fighting him on the counterintelligence side. Solder, terror. You can't. It's not secure. Now people are looking at it, maybe it's a little more secure. Money does buy things. Maybe it'll be better. Because the Iraq people need this. They really do. They need this. I told some of these Iraqis, I said, each one of you in Iraq can have 7 servants in the future. And I wasn't joking. Just all play together. Well, I didn't use those terms, of course. I was a little more diplomatic. Supergiant field, they finally got up to 21,000 barrels. Balad field to the northwest was huge, several billion barrels, and it really never produced much. And then the GOTNIA Basin. Oh, geez. The stratigraphic traps. You know there wasn't one stratigraphic test in Iraq? They're all structurally driven. The stratigraphic traps along the GOTNIA Basin for hundreds of miles. Oil migrates from east to west across Iraq from Iran. It comes up into the GOTNIA Basin. You're going to get calcarenites along the edge of the GOTNIA Basin, and that's where the Sargasso-Jurassic intercratonic basin was formed. You have a very reducing environment, and that is exactly where you're going to have that 400 to 600 foot of TOC of 15, 16, sitting there feeding these calcarenites and deposits along the edge of the basin. It's going to be huge one day. One day there's going to be more oil found in the shales of this part of the world, in the Middle East, than they do have in liquid oil coming out now. I really believe it. I saw TOCs in the western desert of 17 in some of the Silurian rocks. What is the TOC here? Average Eagle Ford. 2? No? 6 to 8. Okay, this was 16, 17. Just think how rich you get that deep buried. Here's the western desert. Here's an AUKUS field. They have one field in a place half the size of Texas. And the only reason that field was there was on a road from Hadith to Alpim along the Syrian border. Here's Jordan. By the way, Risha field is right here, an Ordovician field, which is going to supply a big chunk of the natural gas. I think BP just took that over too. But here is this pipeline. That field, it was drilled because it was near a road. It wasn't geologic. It was a geologic structure, but it was drilled because it was near a road. It had 6 wells in it when I went out there with the Marines are out there. I went out with Marines because I was a Marine at one time, and I felt comfortable with them around me. But there was 6 wells drilled in the 80s, I believe. There was 3 trillion cubic feet sitting under me. And there was another 150 structures like that in the West Desert that have not been drilled. They're Ordovician. These were glacier driven. It was back in the Ordovician Silurian time. You had an uplift, I'm guessing an uplift to the Arabian Basin, probably in Pennsylvania and Mississippian time, because in those wells there was no Pennsylvania and Mississippian sediment. It had to have been eroded away. The only reason, because there's Mississippi and Pennsylvania when you go out to the west from there. So the Arab plate must have uplifted. When it did, what did it form? Horse blocks. There's 152 horse blocks out here with huge structures on them. That seismic is available. It was 2D seismic done in the 70s, 60s. I don't know who has that stuff now. I had a warehouse full. I have no idea where it is. I really don't. Well, I really don't. If I told you, I'd have to shoot you. Okay, this right here, there was not just gas out there, it was rich condensate, and there's no H2S in the Paleozoic rock. So you don't have to have the gas oil separation stabilization plants. You can take that gas right into production. So, again, beautiful seals. Oh, you know, God or Allah must have looked down in this part of the world, not just Iraq, but this whole area, and said, this is my oil country, period. It must have. Because the seals and the reservoirs were all perfect. And even when you had the thrusting, some of those anhydrite seals were so pliable that they remained as seals. They didn't break. Some of them broke, we get the oil seeps, but there were so many of them. Just think of huge oil reservoirs. So one breaks and you get a bunch of oil at the surface. You got 50 below you. Lack of, here's security. Western Desert. Who's going to go out there next to Syria on one side? You're not going to do it without security. But you know who took over AUKUS? The Koreans. A lot of the national oil companies are doing this. They have not pressure from their government. When we were in Baghdad, the Chinese were there, very much so. kind of at night at midnight. But thank God I got out of it to give a talk to their Academy of Science. And then also they want an Eagle Ford specialist here because they have a big basin of Eagle Ford shale they want to have developed. They like using our technology, but they were very much in Iraq. I can't blame them. A lot of oil, they need oil. Okay, potential. 150 structures we identified in that area. These are not a little fault with 10 foot of sand. Reserves, I'm estimating at least 100 trillion cubic feet just in the West Desert. That is probably so low, but I'm a very conservative person. They're all Silurian or Novitian targets. And this is that GOTNIA basin. One day, look at that gravity. It's beautiful oil. It is good oil coming out of that. Here is the main part of Iraq. This field is why the Iran-Iraq war was fought. Right there in this Afar Peninsula. By the way, I was in the Afar, that's where I worked the last 6 months, in the Afar Palace in Baghdad. It was Saddam's lake palace. My urinal had gold handlebars that weren't gold plated. They were solid. And you know what? Our Corps of Engineers came and put lock nuts on them. As if I would steal it as a souvenir. Of course, when I did come back from Vietnam, I accidentally had an AK. Not anymore. So you can't get me on that one. I would have had a Jeep too. No, I'm just joking. Here's Ramallah. But Bajoun right there was a wonderful field. I looked at that. There was about 20 wells drilled in it. Back, I think it was discovered in '76. But this whole area was why 1 million people lost their lives in the 80s. 1 million people because of this. But the oil, the GOTNIA Basin edge comes just like this, comes up in Baghdad. That whole area is going to be one day oil and gas fields. Look at this field right here, the second one. My estimate on West Florida was 10 to 14 billion barrels. They just announced 43 billion barrels in that one field. What does that rival? I mean, this is rivaling anywhere in the world. I have no idea how they got to this number, but there's a major international companies. This was their number. This wasn't the Iraq government's number. I still haven't seen the data. By June, shale oil is running that now. They're up to 175,000 barrels pretty rapidly. That field can produce 1 million barrels a day easily. But what did it take 2 years to do at Bajoun? Just think of where that is. Let me show you where it is. Here's Bajoun, the aerial thing of it. Here's the wells. We found 12 wells. They said there was 20. What is this little dotted line right there? That's the Iranian border. This field actually cuts over like this. There's a deep-sea anticline. It's mainly Miocene production. You have the Zubar and the Delta systems coming in. There are some carbonates in here too, but it's mainly tertiary production. But what did it take 2 years to do here before they go in and really develop in shale? The mines. They're terrible here. I mean, there were more mines than you can shake a stick at along this border. I wouldn't go out there. You know, I don't have a lot of courage. I wouldn't go out there. I mean, I really don't have courage. I was just 2 years ago, I was along the Cambodian-Vietnam border, and I'll show you a picture in there. My daughter and the guides went off along the border, and I was afraid to. And this was 40 years ago. But here, there were more mines placed in here than anywhere in the world along this edge. So it's taken them a lot of time. But there's 16 billion barrels sitting under an easy-to-drill. Probably there's 8 to 10 bays here. At least in a couple of these wells. Why don't you? It does make it worthwhile. There's other fields. These are small fields, half a BCF to a BC. I mean, 1 billion barrels. Security. You get around Basra, it's pretty secure. You get in the southern part, but you get in that middle part. I don't know. Secondary recovery. Everything needed you make a fortune, because I don't care whether it's the Iraq National Oil Company or other companies, you need the service companies. Gravity, seismic, everything needs to be done. Pipelines, I'm allowed to release this now. We did a survey of every pipeline in that country, our engineers did. They were so corroded and so ruined, there were so many leaks everywhere, that we feel that, and this was a few years ago, there'd be huge failings of all of them. They were sending out crude with all that H2S in it, bypassing stabilization plants because they weren't working. What does that do to the inside of these pipes, especially if it's not a good pipe? It just corroded the hell out. Just terrible. Shoot, if I'm using hell. Okay. Supergiant fields. The stratigraphic. When you look at this wells, we had maps of where all the wells were in these fields, by the way. They were all structurally drilled. There weren't any tests of any of these sands coming up the sides of them. What do you do here in the United States along salt domes and stuff? You drill all these flank wells and things. That's going to be drilled one day. But as an engineer said, not now, why? You're exactly right. Here's our final map. This was also published in, we tuned it up a little bit. There was a publication, civilian market like this. All of these little yellow, or these little colored ones like that, those are all the structures to be drilled in Iraq that have not been drilled. This is 2004. Mind you, that's 16 billion barrels. Bina Bawa, okay, Bina Bawa. There's about 4 or 5 fields I can add to this. But if you want to look at something, I did work in northeast Syria also. This is the Sinjar articline. That's Triassic. It's going to be huge production. Look at the size of it. And if you carry it across the border, don't you see a trend? This is it's a huge anticline. And then if you come up here, what is this? These are all going to be productive. These are primarily Triassic up here. These out here probably be towards the Paleozoic, but it could be Triassic in age. And this is all going to be Ordovician, Silurian, and then the GOTNIA Basin will be right here. And that is going to be absolutely huge, stratigraphically. But these are just 2D structures. This was old seismic. When they get 3D in here, this is going to be something else. Here's some of your structures. Alicia High, here's Syria. Okay, there's August right there. Okay, there's Risha. That's a Jordanian field. If you go down there, it's an Ordovician production. If you study that, BP just took it over. I believe BP took it. The big concession here. That is going to be filled in with production on this side of the border too. This is turning out to be, this BP is going to be bigger than they think. It's an old field, but they're going to, it's looking good now. Organic rich source rocks. You have 400 to 600 foot covering a big part of Iraq, sitting there with a TOC up to 17. It's just sitting there. One day, it'll be interesting. Need 3D seismic. There's the other thing. Most of the tests are Cretaceous and shallower in Iraq. The Jurassic is going to be productive. Triassic in a lot of places. There's very few wells. Just think if you had, here in Texas, just 200 deep wells. Interesting. All of Texas. Okay, Iraqi crude. 130 been drilled. That's 70%. Did you see that plus I put there? Please, I put the plus because it's probably closer to 80, 85. There's, here, listen to this right here. I went out with the Iraqis. There were 20 fields that I found. They said these are non-commercial fields. They had a couple of wells on them. Some of them had estimates up to 260 million barrels, and they just abandoned the field. It's not worth it to them. It will be one day. These aren't, you know where they know where these fields are, we did too. And they're considered non-commercial. There's a 17 fields under evaluation. My estimate was 230 to 250 barrels recoverable, billion barrels recoverable. What does that put you in? That is current. I'm not even doing the estimated on the 400 structures. This is currently found oil. That is probably the most important thing I'm going to say right now. Currently found oil. Reserve growth. I went to some fields that they said had some depletion problems. It wasn't because of the reservoirs or the rock. It was because of the infrastructure. They were having troubles. And so you're losing pressure. It had nothing to do with the rock. I did not see one well that I looked at that had any sign of depletion. When you have a really good well where testing was done right, the pressures were not dropping. Which means what? It means that the original estimate of the field, if it was 1 billion, it probably really was 2 billion. They just made a wrong, conservative estimate on the original field. But I didn't see. So just think of a factor of 1.5 times what I just said a minute ago. Increased secondary recovery. They're starting to do that. The water flood projects in Kirkuk and Ramallah were broken. Totally broken. They were pumping in reserve and residual oil. They stopped that, of course. I think Shell is another one that did a study, and others on how to change that and get that. Hope they can fix some of those fields. Natural gas. Natural gas is a no-no word here. They don't like natural gas. If they get natural gas, they don't like it. There's a whole bunch of, we estimated that there's about 200 trillion cubic found today. That is without the new drilling. 200 trillion cubic feet is nothing. Iran has a whole bunch more than that. Here's the bidding. Did you notice that again, actually there was 2 American companies that got something, but Exxon, of course, since they moved up to Iraq, they're all in a fight whether they're going to still stay here or not. But most of these are other companies. They bid on them. It was actually a halfway fair bid. It wasn't as corrupt as you think. Here's the natural gas. There's the Koreans and others. They'll find some gas there. Future bidding. Here's Nasiriyah's a big field. Balad. I don't know if anybody's going to take Baghdad, though. Because you have to work in Sadr City. That's dangerous. New Iraqi law. Oh, I've been fighting with them on this for years. New Iraqi law. I recommended the Texas Railroad Commission to the Iraqi government, every province of it, like the Texas Railroad Commission, so I brought out the handbook from them, and the Bureau of Economic Geology, to have a science in every province to have power to permit and do other things. And that the national government still owned everything. And I think it was Article 108 I wrote, said all hydrocarbons belong to the Iraqi people. Period. All hydrocarbons. But also on 111 I wrote that the provinces have power to share with the national government. The Kurds see it that way. Baghdad wanted a nationalized oil company with just a firm grip and not sharing the revenue. I suggested that the revenue of Iraq go 19% to the Kurds, 24% to the Sunni, and the rest go to the Shia due to population. They do that now, but they don't hand the money out. I don't know where it's going. The Kurds aren't getting theirs. So, anyway. It's a lot of money. We'll go real quick. Kirkuk, wonderful field if they can repair the damage. If you've ever, any of you worked Kirkuk in that Asmari limestone, that reef trend, it's beautiful. Beautiful carbonate buildup. It's like a big, huge carbonate buildup, and it stretches for miles and miles. That's what blew out, by the way, right there. Here's a structure. These, unfortunately, are run by the Iraq government. There it is, beautiful, typical. That's a simplified version. There are those Gulf Keystone blocks. They say 20 billion, I said 16 billion, but it might quibble over a little bit. And there's no Permian. They are drilling horizontal here too. By us, and I'm just going to go by these real quick. These are just, you can see all of them have sulfur. You have to put up with that. Depositional. Did you know that carbonate shelf during the Jurassic and early Cretaceous before the rifting closed and started compressing? Did you know that thing stretched for about 2,000 kilometers? A carbonate shelf, just think today, of a 2,000 long carbonate shelf. And you know how wide that thing was? We're figuring it was up to 1,000 kilometers wide. And you had varying amounts of, sometimes you had lower sea levels, higher sea levels, intercratonic basins forming, and you had some anoxic, or low oxygen areas, which created all of the great reservoir source rocks. Okay, let me just go back. Oh, talk. Janita, these wells here that we were on, here's the test of the first 10 wells. They've drilled, I think, 20 now. 44,000 barrels, 35,000, 37,000. It makes it worthwhile, and it is hooked up to a pipeline now, which bypasses Baghdad, goes up into Turkey. Turkey and the Kurds have signed an agreement, which made Baghdad mad. But Baghdad can't say anything about it because they still have to use the Iraq-Turkey line to get their oil out. So they're caught between a rock and a hard place right now. Something's going to happen. Here's the typical structure. If you go out there, there's oil seeps, anticline. There are a lot of little faults. Oh, this is another one. They had a lot of gas up here. Lots of gas. One day, it'll be used. Here's Taki. Here's that great field. The first horizontal hole. I think, oh, there it is. 25,000 barrels a day from 2,700 feet, 2,600 feet. This one just this last week, I think, tested 30,000 foot of horizontal at 32,500 in the Cretaceous. They'll be bought out too, this company. It's a Norwegian company. Let me show you some of the structures here. Let me go past these because I know we're getting late. But let me show you some. I want to show you this, what the surface looks like on satellite, and then you put the fields on. Look at these anticlines. There's that Western Zagros. This is Saginaw North. That was Sterling Oil. They gave that up after drilling a sort of a gaseous Jurassic, no, not Jurassic hole. Forgot whether it's Cretaceous hole here. That's one of the few open blocks left in all of Kurdistan. That's an open block. One day it won't be, I guess. There was the field that we were interested in. That's why we got it circled. There's 1 billion barrels now. And there's a oil pipeline coming down here. And that'll all be attached. Janil owns that also with them. I believe it's a Austrian company. Yeah, okay. I'm just going to go real quick on these. You can see these are simplified reservoirs. These are in the low folded areas. You don't have the huge faulting occurring in these low folded areas as you get towards Great Western. You have just big anticlines pushed up. You don't have the huge overthrust problem that you do in other areas. But again, you have 10, 15, 20 pays in these areas. And that Great Western had five of these anticlines to drill. This is one of them. These are from the top of Jarib, that Miocene. Look at these blocks still to be drilled. This one block. Every one of these will be productive. You can't. There's too many oil seeps. It's all oil under it. It's just all oil. Here's another block. It's typical. Look at this. The thrusting. You can come up here. This is in the middle again of the section. It's extremely simple, but you notice is right here. You're very deep. They won't hit the Permian here. They'd be about 22,000 feet. So that's the problem in the low folded areas. Again, there's a thrusting. It just pushes over on top. This is solid oil. There were wells that I saw that were 9,500 foot deep, and they had 4,800 foot of pay in them. Do you I need to say anything different? And I don't mean just 4,800 foot of possible rock that had oil in it. I'm talking actual pay. Half the well was pay. But of course it was hard to drill because they kept losing fluids because it kept going in, but when it flowed back, I think they tested through the casings. Another one, you know, when you test these things, and there's just Hunt just came up to a well, 18,000 barrels. Again, they've only tested 6 of those, I think, zones so far. There's the Hunt. Now, he had guts because this line right there is disputed. You see this block right here, it says BASIN, that's Chevron now. Black Mountain, 120 kilometer long, full of oil. That's going to be a Jurassic, Triassic, perhaps lower Cretaceous even there. Wow, these are just others. Here's this. Iraq has the greatest new frontier. There's nobody that, because they haven't been looked at. Every other country has been looked at in this part of the world. This is it. I was like